Now, I liked Black Widow. I enjoyed it a lot. I honestly do think it is one of the better MCU standalone films. It's a great action film with a creepy, eerie tone with a subtle message that honestly is very thought-provoking. It's funny, and the cast is great. I think Florence Pugh, David Harbour, Rachel Weisz are all great additions to the MCU. Now, the ending does get clunky, and it does fall into a lot of the tropes that Marvel movies fall into, specifically with the villain problem. I mean, honestly, just the whole, last one-third of it, not great, especially the end credit scenes. And if it wasn't for the end credit scenes, I think I would have liked this movie a lot more. So let's talk about it. Now, I don't know if I need to clarify, but I will. This will be spoilers for Black Widow, and also probably Avengers Infinity War, Endgame, most of the Marvel movies up until this. First off, let's talk about the history of Black Widow within the MCU, because the MCU has consistently done her dirt. From her first appearance in Iron Man 2, she is just overly sexualized, and then it continues in Avengers, and then we have this horrific poster from Captain America the Winter Soldier. Basically, she just serves as this side female character for the sake of being female. This was way before the MCU seemed to care about making actually interesting female characters. So yes, it goes without saying her solo movie was overdue, but even within the past few years, the MCU still did her dirt. I think the only real characterization we ever saw from her was from Age of Ultron, which we kind of got a backstory, but really the person who got the most backstory in that movie was Hawkeye, another character that was underutilized, but the MCU chose him over her. Then we get to Endgame, where she suffers a horrific death, and I'm gonna argue that death should have been Hawkeye. Why, you ask? Well, we already saw his backstory. We know where he comes from, and the movie Endgame starts off with him and his family. It sets him up to have this redemption arc. He kind of turns evil for a couple years during the blip. He should have died there and sacrificed himself, but instead it's Natasha, who we don't get the same backstory. We don't get to see her family up until this point, but yet she's the one who has to go and die. Now, does the movie Black Widow save that? I mean, maybe a little bit, but I'm talking up until this point in time, the MCU continued to do her dirty. I mean, this was 2 years ago, 2019. I'm not talking 2009. I'm not talking 2014 with her other appearances. I'm talking 2 years ago. They're still doing her dirty. In fact, what they do by killing her off is she misses out on what some might argue this really cheesy scene of all the female Marvel characters coming together, but she should have been leading that. Whether or not you thought that worked or not, I personally thought it was kind of cool, but she should have been the person in front for that scene. And then at the end of that movie, the whole world is mourning not her, but Iron Man. Yeah, she gets a little thing there, like they pay tribute to her, but everyone is there for him, and I get it. He's the star of the franchise, but if the movies weren't set around seeing the whole world through his point of view, I would argue that she is just as important to the creation of the Avengers. She should have absolutely been acknowledged more than what she got in that movie. And here's the thing, at very least, her family should have been invited to that funeral. And I get it, her family didn't exist in the MCU at this point. But, what Black Widow does is it draws attention that her family did exist and they weren't invited to that funeral. And maybe no one knew her family existed. But I highly doubt that Nick Fury, Hawkeye, some of these other high-profile people didn't know her family existed at all. So is that the fault of Endgame? Not necessarily. All I'm doing is drawing attention to the fact that throughout the course of the MCU, no one has given her the proper respect. And that's why I think this movie works so well on its own, because it finally gives her that respect. I think where it falls horribly short, though, is at the end credits, so let's talk about it. So what happens in those end credits? Basically, her sister, Yelena, is visiting her grave. And here's the first reason I don't like this. Because the movie is so positive. It's giving her justice. It's giving her all this respect. And then it can't help itself but remind you, oh yeah, she's dead. Did we need to see it in this movie? Couldn't you have waited until the next project, till something else? But you couldn't even wait beyond the 2 hours we were watching her character progression to remind us that she was dead. In fact, a large portion of this movie is building up the relationship between Natasha and her sister Yelena. But yet Yelena doesn't even get time to mourn her sister's death. She gets about 30 seconds so they knew to move on to the next thing, and I think that's tragic. I think this movie would have been so much more impactful if it ended on a more positive note, and we didn't have to be reminded, oh yeah, her sister wasn't at her funeral, her sister wasn't able to properly mourn, and this movie kind of teases like, oh, we want to give you a little taste of her mourning, but they don't actually give her time to process it. They don't give her time to process it because they need to quickly move on to the next project, because in this moment, Valentina, this new character that we saw from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, approaches Yelena and is like, hey, I got a new mission for you. And so what this tells me is that the makers of this film didn't actually want us to mourn Natasha in this moment. They just wanted to show you, hey, look, she's dead. Okay, what's next? And I have no problem with the character of Valentina. I really don't. I think she's an interesting addition, and you knew that Marvel was going to have a post-credit scene in Black Widow. I just wish it didn't have to be so tacky and brush over something that they clearly don't care about. But the final issue I take with this post-credit scene is the characterization of Yelena. Now, this whole movie was honestly a standout performance from Florence Pugh. I really think this sets her up to be one of the leads in Phase 4 of Marvel, and I am excited to see her in the new Hawkeye show, but the plot right now is that she's going to be hunting Hawkeye. She's probably going to be the antagonist of his own show. But once again, the MCU is taking this female Black Widow and making her the antagonist while Hawkeye gets his own show. Now, I'm not saying she has to be the good guy forever, but the movie literally ends with her freeing all these females who were kidnapped by this evil male. It is such a powerful ending and creates her to be, honestly, a better hero than most of the heroes in the Avengers. And so it's just a bummer that the movie ends on that note, and then within seconds, oh, actually, Hawkeye's the real hero, and you're just gonna go hunt him down. It's really disappointing. I wouldn't mind if she was just the antagonist, but at least give a little more time to show how she gets to that point. Don't just brush it over like your sister's dead, you need to go avenge her. Honestly, what it feels like, it's like the director of Black Widow had an agenda. They had a place they want to reach, and I think they accomplished that by the end of the movie. And then the post-credit scene feels like it was directed and conceived by Kevin Feige, maybe someone else. I don't want to pin it all on him, but something completely separate than the direction of Black Widow. And I think it's a bummer, because Black Widow is honestly, like I've been saying, a great standalone film, and I think if it wasn't for where Marvel wanted it to go, it could have been a great, fantastic ending. And now, obviously, this movie would have been so much powerful if it was released before Endgame, because I think it would have fixed a lot of these issues. It would have made her death so much more powerful. It would have allowed people like Florence Pugh to actually be in Endgame and be at her funeral, but that's just not how it happened. So I think Marvel's really backtracking now. They're trying to fix their mistakes, and in turn, they're falling into similar habits of not actually caring about their female characters and just trying to move on to the next project. So that is my thoughts on Black Widow end credits scene. Have you seen it? What do you think? Did it work for you, or did you think it was just a mess and clunky like me? Comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I will see you next time.